The evacuation order had come out of the American Embassy in Baghdad at 3:14 a.m. local time, transmitted through the State Department's Emergency Communications Framework to every U.S. government installation in Iraq simultaneously. The trigger was not a single event. It was the accumulation of 3 days of deteriorating security indicators that the embassy's regional security officer had been tracking with mounting specificity. 2 confirmed militia rocket attacks on the Green Zone in 48 hours, a credible intelligence product indicating that a coalition of Iran-backed groups had coordinated targeting packages against Western diplomatic infrastructure, and the severing of the main road corridor between Baghdad and the Kuwait border by an armed convoy whose composition and equipment were inconsistent with any non-state actor operating without external logistics support. The decision to order the evacuation had been made before the final trigger arrived. The final trigger, a direct attack on a convoy carrying contract personnel from the embassy's annex facility, accelerated the timeline by 6 hours. The evacuation route was maritime. The overland corridors were compromised. The airspace over central Iraq was being contested by drone activity that made fixed-wing charter operations out of Baghdad International a calculated risk rather than a managed one. The plan that the Military Sealift Command and Fifth Fleet had maintained in continuous readiness for exactly this contingency called for the consolidation of American citizens and designated third-country nationals at the port facilities in Qasr in southern Iraq, transport by landing craft to a U.S. Navy amphibious vessel positioned in international waters in the northern Persian Gulf, and subsequent transit south toward the Gulf of Oman and the open sea. The USS Carrier Strike Group had repositioned to the northern Persian Gulf at maximum speed beginning at 4:47 a.m., 12 hours before the first evacuation buses departed Baghdad. The timing of the repositioning had been calculated against the evacuation timeline with the precision that naval planning requires when the variable being calculated is the safety of non-combatant American civilians rather than a tactical maneuver objective. The carrier's position in the northern Gulf was not subtle. It was not meant to be. A carrier strike group repositioning to the northern Persian Gulf at maximum speed during an active evacuation operation communicates something specific and visible to every surveillance system on both the Iranian and Iraqi coastlines, and the communication is deliberate. This evacuation will be completed, and the force that will complete it is present, armed, and not asking permission. The IRGC Navy's response began appearing on the tactical plot at 6:22 a.m. The first contact was a Type Moudge-class frigate, Iran's domestically produced surface combatant, the most capable vessel in the IRGC Navy's order of battle, departing Bandar Abbas on a southwest heading at 22 knots, designated Sierra 1. The contact's heading was not toward the carrier's position in the northern Gulf. It was toward the central corridor of the Persian Gulf, a position from which it could monitor and potentially contest the transit of the landing craft between Qasr and the amphibious vessel's holding position. The geometry was deliberate in its ambiguity. Sierra 1 was not on an intercept heading for the carrier, which would have constituted a direct provocation whose implications were immediately calculable. It was on a heading that gave it tactical options: observation, interference with the landing craft transit, or a rapid course change toward the carrier if the operational situation developed in that direction. Ambiguity was the weapon. The geometry preserved the option while deferring the commitment. The second development was not a vessel. It was an emission. At 6:41 a.m., the electronic warfare suite on the carrier's screening cruiser registered active radar emissions from bearing 017 degrees. The Iranian coastline, northeast of Bandar Abbas, in the vicinity of the Keshem Island Coastal Defense Installation. The emission characteristics were classified within 12 seconds. The Noor anti-ship missile system's acquisition radar, operating in active search mode. The Noor system, a coastal defense missile battery with an effective range of approximately 170 kilometers and a warhead capable of mission-defeating damage to any vessel in the Persian Gulf below cruiser displacement, was tracking, not launched. Tracking. Its acquisition radar beam sweeping the Gulf surface picture with the systematic thoroughness of a system that had been activated for operational use rather than maintenance testing. The carrier's Combat Information Center logged the emission at 6:41:09 a.m. The watch team's response was precisely calibrated. Standard missile battery to active standby, SPY-1D radar to full emissions, Phalanx CIWS to active tracking mode. No weapons fired. No course change. The carrier maintained its position in the northern Gulf at 12 knots on its holding pattern, the evacuation timeline running in the background of every tactical decision being made on the bridge and in the CIC simultaneously. At 6:54 a.m., a second coastal emission appeared. Bearing 023 degrees, further northeast along the Iranian coastline. Classification within 9 seconds. A second Noor battery at a different installation, activated in search mode. 2 separate coastal anti-ship missile batteries, both active, both tracking. Their combined engagement geometry covering the northern Persian Gulf with overlapping fields of fire that placed the carrier and every vessel associated with the evacuation operation inside a dense shore-based weapons envelope. The strike group commander assessed the tactical picture at 6:56 a.m. from the flag spaces. 2 shore-based missile batteries active. 1 IRGC frigate repositioning to the central corridor. The evacuation operation in its early stages, with the first bus convoys not yet having reached Qasr. The timeline for the evacuation's most vulnerable phase, the open water transit of landing craft between the Iraqi port facility and the amphibious vessel's holding position, was 5 to 7 hours away. The 5 to 7 hours between now and that phase was the interval in which the geometry needed to be managed. The strike group commander directed the EA-18G Growler, assigned to the strike group's electronic attack mission, to reposition from its holding orbit to a new station that placed it on the bearing between the carrier and the 2 active Noor battery emitters. The Growler's ALQ-99 jamming system came online at 6:59 a.m. Its jamming energy directed at the specific frequency bands associated with the Noor's active radar guidance architecture, the acquisition radar, and the command uplink frequencies through which a battery crew would direct a missile in flight toward its terminal target. The jamming was focused, attributed, and powerful, designed to be identified as coming from a specific U.S. Navy platform, designed to communicate that the degradation of the Noor battery's operational effectiveness was an active, current, and ongoing condition rather than a transient anomaly. The first Noor battery's radar output reduced by approximately 40% within 22 seconds of the jamming activation. The second battery shifted frequency at 7:01 a.m. The Growler followed within 11 seconds. The frequency shift contest ran through 3 cycles over the following 8 minutes. Activation, frequency shift, follow, activation again, each cycle consuming the Noor battery's frequency agility reserve and building the electronic intelligence product that documented their technical specifications with a precision that previous collection had not achieved. At 7:08 a.m., both Noor batteries reduced to standby emissions. Not shutdown, standby. A power reduction that maintained the battery's operational readiness while stepping back from the active search mode that had been degraded by the jamming. The Iranian Coastal Defense Command had made a tactical assessment. The jamming was present, it was effective, and continuing to operate in full search mode while being actively jammed was producing diminishing returns for the targeting picture while simultaneously revealing technical characteristics to the collection systems arrayed against the emitters. Standby mode preserved the option and reduced the intelligence giveaway. The Growler maintained its jamming posture at reduced output, monitoring the Noor frequencies for any reactivation. At 7:14 a.m., Sierra 1 altered course. The IRGC frigate, which had been transiting southwest toward the central Gulf corridor for 52 minutes, turned 31 degrees to the north, a heading change that shifted its projected track away from the landing craft transit corridor and toward a position approximately 40 nautical miles southeast of the carrier's holding pattern. The new heading placed Sierra 1 on a track that, if maintained, would bring it to a surveillance position from which it could observe the evacuation operation's maritime phase without crossing any geographic threshold that constituted a direct challenge to any specific element of the strike group's defensive perimeter. It was the IRGC's standard operational adjustment, When a direct approach produces electronic countermeasures that reduce its effectiveness, transition to a surveillance posture that maintains presence and option while reducing the geometry's immediate escalation potential. The MH-60R Seahawk assigned to the Strike Group's surface warfare mission received new tasking at 7:16 a.m. The crew was directed to close Sierra 1 and establish an overhead surveillance orbit at 450 feet, transmitting continuous video to the flag spaces and to Fifth Fleet. The helicopter descended from its patrol altitude and moved toward the IRGC frigate's position. At 7:24 a.m., the crew reported overhead Sierra 1 at 430 feet, the frigate's deck configuration, weapons mounts, and communications antenna array visible on the flyer with the close-range detail that 430 feet provides. The video feed was received by Fifth Fleet's Operations Center and by the Combined Joint Task Force Headquarters, managing the evacuation operation from its command node in Kuwait. At 7:31 a.m., the evacuation's first significant ground development arrived in the flag spaces as a liaison officer report. The bus convoy from the Baghdad Embassy Annex had reached Qasr port, and the first American citizens were boarding the landing craft. Approximately 340 people in the first wave. The landing craft's transit to the amphibious vessel's holding position was 34 nautical miles through international waters in the northern Persian Gulf. 34 nautical miles that would take approximately 3 hours at the landing craft's transit speed. 3 hours. The Noor batteries were in standby mode. Sierra 1 was in surveillance posture 62 nautical miles southeast of the carrier. The Growler was maintaining jamming coverage at reduced output. The geometry was stable. It was stable for 41 minutes. At 8:12 a.m., the first Noor battery reactivated. Not in search mode, in fire control mode. The distinction was registered by the Electronic Warfare Suite within 6 seconds and classified within 4 additional seconds. Fire control mode meant a targeting solution was being developed against a specific vessel in the battery's coverage area, not a general surface search. The specific vessel that the battery's fire control geometry, based on its bearing and the known coverage arc of its installation position, would be targeting at this moment was the carrier. The Tactical Action Officer transmitted the fire control activation report to the Strike Group Commander at 8:12:09 a.m. and requested weapons release authority escalation. The request was transmitted simultaneously to Fifth Fleet for higher authority awareness. The Strike Group Commander authorized the Growler to shift from its reduced output monitoring posture to maximum power-directed jamming of the fire control channel at 8:12:17 a.m., 8 seconds between the fire control activation report and the response authorization. The Growler's ALQ-99 came up to maximum output at 8:12:22 a.m., flooding the Noor battery's fire control frequency with coherent noise at a power level sufficient to prevent any missile launched from that battery from receiving mid-course correction updates. A missile launched from the Noor system without mid-course correction capability had a significantly degraded probability of achieving terminal guidance accuracy against a maneuvering target at the engagement ranges applicable to the carrier's current position. The fire control activation also triggered the carrier's defensive posture shift. At 8:12:25 a.m., the carrier launched 2 FA-18F Super Hornets from the Combat Air Patrol rotation in a rapid launch sequence. Both aircraft were airborne within 4 minutes and established an orbit between the carrier and the bearing of the active Noor battery, their own electronic warfare suites adding to the jamming power directed at the fire control architecture, and their targeting pods acquiring the battery's installation coordinates for a strike option that had not yet been authorized, but that existed, documented and solved in the Air Wing's targeting system from the moment the aircraft's pods locked on. Sierra 1 activated its own fire control radar at 8:17 a.m. The type 346 multi-function radar shifted from search mode to a targeting configuration within 6 seconds of Sierra 1's commanding officer receiving whatever communication the Iranian Naval Command had transmitted. The IRGC frigate now had a fire control solution developing on the carrier's hull simultaneously with the Noor battery's shore-based solution. 2 targeting systems, 2 engagement vectors. The geometry of the simultaneous activations communicated a coordination that was not coincidental. Both systems had gone to fire control mode within 5 minutes of each other, following the evacuation operation's most exposed phase beginning, suggesting a pre-planned response threshold had been reached in Tehran. The Seahawk crew over Sierra 1 activated the laser designator at 8:18 a.m. The solution locked onto the IRGC frigate's bridge structure and forward missile launcher simultaneously. The crew held the solution through the helicopter's motion above the vessel, the beam invisible to the deck crew below but completely legible to the frigate's electro-optical defense sensors. The strike group commander authorized active standby for the Standard missile battery at 8:18:31 a.m. and directed the Aegis cruiser to activate its own targeting system against Sierra 1. The cruiser's SPQ-9B radar shifted to fire control mode at 8:18:37 a.m., its targeting beam locking onto the IRGC frigate's hull with the same clarity with which Sierra 1's radar was locked onto the carrier. The geometry was now symmetrical. Each side had targeting solutions on the other's vessels. Neither side had fired, and the landing craft carrying 340 American civilians was 28 nautical miles into its 34 nautical mile transit, 6 nautical miles from the amphibious vessel. The Noor battery's fire control radar output fluctuated at 8:21 a.m., a variation in the emission characteristics that the electronic warfare officer classified as a system experiencing the specific kind of solution quality degradation that sustained, high-power jamming produces when the targeted frequency band cannot be successfully vacated. The battery's crew was fighting the jamming and losing the fight incrementally. Each second that the fire control solution remained degraded was a second in which a launch, if ordered, would be less accurate than the battery's uncontested capability. Sierra 1's Type 346 radar shut down at 8:24 a.m. The shutdown was complete, not a power reduction, a full cessation of the targeting emission. The electronic warfare officer logged the shutdown at 8:24:07 a.m. The Seahawk crew, directly overhead, Sierra 1 at 430 feet, with the laser designator active on the frigate's bridge and launcher simultaneously, reported no change in deck activity and no visible response to the shutdown from the vessel's crew. The fire control radar had been turned off. Whatever Iranian command authority had authorized its activation had reversed that authorization. The Noor battery's fire control emission ceased at 8:26 a.m. 2 minutes after Sierra 1's radar shutdown, the shore-based battery followed the same sequence, its fire control mode emission dropping out of the electronic warfare picture completely. The Growler logged the cessation of both fire control emitters at 8:26:14 a.m. and maintained its jamming at reduced output power, monitoring, not standing down. The symmetrical targeting posture that had existed for 8 minutes and 47 seconds resolved into a picture where the U.S. side maintained its targeting solutions and the Iranian side had withdrawn its emitters from fire control mode. The Aegis cruiser held its SPQ-9B lock on Sierra 1 for an additional 9 minutes before the strike group commander authorized de-escalation to active standby at 8:35 a.m. The landing craft completed its transit and moored alongside the amphibious vessel at 9:44 a.m. The 340 American citizens in the first wave were aboard the amphibious vessel at 10:02 a.m. The second wave departed Qasr at 11:15 a.m. with 287 additional evacuees. The third and final wave, carrying the last 114 personnel and the embassy's most sensitive material, departed at 2:30 p.m. and arrived at the amphibious vessel at 5:17 p.m. During the second and third wave transits, Sierra 1 maintained its surveillance posture southeast of the carrier at ranges between 55 and 70 nautical miles, never again activating its fire control radar, never altering its heading toward the evacuation formation. The Noor batteries remained in standby mode throughout the afternoon, their radars silent, their presence registered on the Growler's collection picture as systems that were ready but not active. The evacuation was completed at 5:17 p.m. 741 American citizens and designated third country nationals were aboard the amphibious vessel and transiting south toward the Gulf of Oman. The engagement report compiled at 7:30 p.m. documented the morning's tactical sequence with the precision the record required. Sierra 1, Moudge-class frigate, 1 fire control radar activation lasting 14 minutes before shutdown, maximum approach range of 62 nautical miles maintained throughout. Noor Battery 1. 1 fire control activation lasting 13 minutes and 47 seconds, degraded to below effective guidance quality by sustained ALQ-99 jamming prior to cessation. Noor Battery 2, activated in search mode, shifted to standby under jamming, not reactivated to fire control mode. Growler, total active jamming duration 2 hours and 4 minutes. Seahawk laser designation on Sierra 1, active from 7:24 a.m. to 8:33 a.m., 1 hour and 9 minutes. 2 FA-18F. Super Hornets launched in rapid sequence, airborne for 42 minutes, targeting solutions developed on Noor Battery 1 installation but not executed. 0 weapons fired. 0 weapons impacts. 0 evacuee casualties. 741 people extracted. The cost section documented the material consumption with equivalent precision. Growler ALQ-99 jamming pod thermal cycle count elevated. Depot maintenance cycle required within 90 days. 2 F/A-18F Super Hornet rapid launches outside the standard combat air patrol rotation sequence. Structural inspection required per maintenance manual. Seahawk, 1 hour and 9 minutes of laser designator active operation requiring calibration check. Aegis cruiser, standard missile battery held in active standby for 1 hour and 3 minutes without employment. No munitions expended. What the engagement report could not fully document was what it cost to manage an escalating tactical confrontation. 2 active fire control radars, a shore-based coastal defense battery, and an armed IRGC surface combatant, all simultaneously brought to targeting configuration against a carrier strike group, while simultaneously tracking the progress of landing craft carrying American civilians across a 34 nautical mile open water transit. The tactical picture and the humanitarian picture were running on the same displays at the same moment, managed by the same watch teams under the authority of the same commanding officers. Every decision about whether to escalate, whether to de-escalate, whether to hold the jamming at maximum output or reduce it, whether to maintain the Aegis cruiser's targeting lock on Sierra 1 or stand it down, every one of those decisions was made in the context of a landing craft that needed to complete its transit before any of the tactical variables changed in ways that would make completion harder. The landing craft completed its transit. The tactical variables were managed. The 2 fire control radars were withdrawn from targeting mode. The 740 people who needed to leave left. The geometry of deterrence held the space open long enough for the mission to complete. 2 shore-based batteries. 1 IRGC frigate. 8 minutes and 47 seconds of simultaneous fire control activation against a U.S. carrier. 2 hours and 4 minutes of active jamming. 1 laser designation held for 69 minutes. 0 shots fired. 741 people evacuated. The Persian Gulf does not grant safe passage to the vessels that ask permission for it. It grants it to the vessels that hold the geometry, maintain the posture, and refuse to let the tactical picture become the reason the mission does not complete. The mission completed. The record shows why.